In the heart of the United States, nestled among rolling hills and lush forests where morning mist clung to ancient oaks, lay a village renowned throughout the region for its tranquility and harmony. The residents of Wilbrook lived in perfect sync, sharing resources and supporting one another in ways that seemed almost magical to outsiders. Their community gardens flourished with vegetables tended by many hands, their children were raised collectively with love from all families, and their elderly were honored with wisdom circles held every Sunday beneath the great willow tree that gave the village its name. Despite their financial struggles, the nearest city was 3 hours away and job opportunities were scarce. The villagers thrived in ways that transcended material wealth. They had built their own small economy based on crafts, organic farming, and the occasional tourism from those seeking respite from modern life's chaos. Word of their unique way of life had spread through social media posts and travel blogs, attracting visitors from far and wide who sought to experience genuine community in an increasingly disconnected world. However, the village council, led by the wise elder Margaret Chin, maintained a strict policy. Strangers were allowed only a brief stay of 3 days maximum, under the supervision of assigned host families, to ensure the community's safety and preserve their delicate social balance. This rule had served them well for decades, protecting their peace while still allowing them to share their philosophy with curious outsiders. The village of 200 souls knew each other's histories, celebrated each birth and mourned each loss together. But lately, those losses had been mounting in a way that filled the community with quiet dread. The villagers faced a significant challenge that threatened the very foundation of their idyllic existence: a severe shortage of medical professionals. The nearest hospital was a 2-hour drive on winding mountain roads, and the small clinic they'd maintained had been without a permanent doctor for nearly 18 months, ever since Dr. Patterson had retired and moved to live with his daughter in Oregon. When illness struck, and it had been striking with increasing frequency that harsh winter, they often had to rely on makeshift remedies passed down through generations. Sarah Mitchell, the village's herbalist and unofficial medical advisor, did her best with poultices, tinctures, and the limited medical training she'd received from Dr. Patterson. But her best wasn't enough when 10-year-old Emma Rodriguez developed what appeared to be appendicitis, requiring a terrifying midnight drive to the city hospital. It wasn't enough when elderly Thomas Blackwood's heart condition worsened, and they could only make him comfortable while waiting for an ambulance that arrived too late. The losses were leading to unnecessary suffering, and the community's spirit was beginning to fracture under the weight of grief and helplessness. Desperate for a solution, the village council convened an emergency meeting in the town hall, a modest building adorned with hand-carved wooden beams and quilts made by the founding families. After hours of emotional discussion, they agreed to send a plea to neighboring states, medical schools, and even international aid organizations, seeking a doctor willing to provide temporary aid. Even just a few months would help them establish better protocols and train locals in basic medical care. Margaret Chin personally wrote letters to dozens of organizations, her aged hand steady despite her worry. "We are a small community," she wrote, "but we are a loving one. We cannot offer much in terms of salary, but we can provide housing, food, and the gratitude of people who genuinely care for one another. Please, if there is anyone willing to help, we are in desperate need." For weeks, they received only polite rejections or silence. Then, on a gray March morning, an email arrived that would change everything. Their request was met with an unexpected response. A doctor named Victor Ashford, a man with impressive credentials from European medical institutions, was willing to treat their ailing residents. His email was brief but professional, stating that he was on a humanitarian mission, and required only basic accommodations and access to a workspace where he could treat patients and conduct necessary medical research to better understand rural health challenges. The council was cautious at first. Something about the quick response and vague details made Margaret uneasy, but the recent death of young mother Alicia Santos from a treatable infection had left the community desperate. After video interviews and verification of his medical credentials, which all checked out through online databases, they agreed to his terms. Dr. Ashford arrived on a rainy April evening, driving a large van filled with medical equipment. He was a tall man in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair, penetrating gray eyes, and a manner that was simultaneously charming and distant. He smiled warmly when greeting the welcoming committee, shaking hands with genuine-seeming enthusiasm, but his eyes remained cold, calculating, assessing. Initially, the villagers were overjoyed, grateful for the medical attention that had been so desperately lacking. Dr. Ashford set up his practice in the old clinic, working long hours to see patients. He diagnosed conditions with remarkable accuracy, prescribed medications he'd brought with him, and even performed minor surgeries in his well-equipped mobile facility. Children who had suffered from chronic conditions showed improvement. Adults with long-ignored health issues finally received treatment. Within weeks, Dr. Ashford was being hailed as a miracle worker, a savior sent in their darkest hour. He was invited to community dinners, where he'd share fascinating stories of his work in remote regions of Africa and Asia. He attended the Sunday wisdom circles, listening attentively to the elders' stories. He seemed genuinely interested in their way of life, often commenting on how remarkable and unique their community was, how they represented something pure that had been lost in modern society. But there were small things, details that some noticed but dismissed in their gratitude. The way he'd sometimes watch people with an intensity that went beyond medical observation. The fact that he always insisted on privacy during examinations, even requesting that his clinic be off-limits after hours. The peculiar locked room in the back of his facility that he claimed was for storing sensitive medications. And then, 3 months after his arrival, the disappearances began. It started with Marcus Webb, a strong young farmer known for his early morning routines. When he failed to show up for the community breakfast one Saturday, his friends assumed he'd overslept. But his bed hadn't been slept in, his truck was still parked in his driveway, and there was no note, no explanation. The village organized search parties, combing the forests and checking the river. They found nothing. Marcus had simply vanished. 2 weeks later, elderly Rosemary Patterson disappeared from her cottage in the middle of the night. Her door was unlocked, her cat was crying for food, and her knitting lay on the chair as if she'd only stepped away for a moment. Then came Daniel Torres, 16 years old and full of life, who'd gone to the clinic for a routine follow-up appointment and never came home. His mother, frantic with worry, had gone to the clinic only to be told by Dr. Ashford that Daniel had left hours earlier, seeming perfectly healthy. The community was gripped by fear and confusion. Was there a predator in the woods? Had someone dangerous infiltrated their peaceful haven? The police from the nearby town came to investigate but found no evidence of foul play, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. People simply disappeared into thin air. Suspicion began to creep through the village like poison. Neighbors who had trusted each other for decades started locking their doors. Parents kept their children close. The Sunday wisdom circles became tense gatherings where people shared theories and accusations in hushed whispers. Interestingly, Dr. Ashford was one of the few people never suspected. He had been nothing but helpful, often joining search parties and offering to examine anyone who might be suffering from stress-related symptoms. He provided sedatives for the anxious, sleeping pills for the insomniac, and counseling for the traumatized. His presence had become so woven into the fabric of daily life that he seemed above suspicion. But one person was watching, noticing patterns that others missed. 22-year-old James Nakamura had always been observant, a trait that had made him an excellent wildlife photographer and the village's unofficial documentarian. He'd grown up in Wilbrook, left for college and returned 2 years ago when he realized that the life he'd built in the city felt hollow compared to the community he'd left behind. James had noticed something the others hadn't. All 3 disappearances had occurred within 2 days of the missing person having an appointment at Dr. Ashford's clinic. It might have been coincidence, but James's instincts told him otherwise. He'd also noticed the doctor's odd behavior during the search parties, the way Ashford seemed more interested in observing the searchers than actually searching, the slight smile that flickered across his face when someone expressed particularly intense grief. Unable to shake his suspicions, James decided to investigate. He began discreetly, asking casual questions about appointment times, reviewing the sign-in sheet at the clinic when volunteering to organize it, and noting the doctor's schedule and movements. The breakthrough came on a moonless night in late June when James, unable to sleep, went for a walk and saw lights on in the clinic at 2 a.m. The building should have been dark and locked. Staying in the shadows, he crept closer and saw Dr. Ashford's van backed up to the rear entrance, the entrance to that mysterious locked room. Heart pounding, James retrieved his camera with the telephoto lens and found a position in the trees where he could observe without being seen. 4 hours he watched and waited, taking photographs whenever movement caught his eye. Just before dawn, Dr. Ashford emerged from the back room, locking it carefully behind him. But in those brief seconds when the door was open, James's camera captured something that made his blood run cold. Medical equipment that looked far too sophisticated for a rural clinic, and strapped to a chair in the harsh fluorescent light, he saw a figure he recognized, Marcus Webb, alive but clearly sedated, with electrodes attached to his head. James's hands shook as he reviewed the images on his camera's screen. This was no simple kidnapping. The equipment, the setup, It looked like something from a research facility, something designed for experimentation. He spent the next 3 days following the doctor whenever possible, documenting his movements and carefully exploring around the clinic. He discovered that the locked room had a ventilation system that was far more complex than necessary, and that the doctor made mysterious trips to the woods behind the clinic, always carrying a briefcase and always checking carefully to ensure he wasn't followed. James knew he needed more proof before going to the authorities, something concrete that would stand up to scrutiny. So he did the most dangerous thing possible. He decided to break into the clinic and see what was really happening in that locked room. James waited for the perfect opportunity, the night of the summer festival when the entire village, including Dr. Ashford, would be gathered at the town square for the celebration. He'd watched the doctor leave, dressed casually and carrying nothing but his phone, clearly planning to stay for the festivities. Using lockpicking skills learned from YouTube videos and practiced on his own doors, James managed to get into the clinic. His hands trembled as he worked on the lock to the mysterious back room, every creak of the old building making him freeze in terror. Finally, the lock clicked open. What he found inside was beyond his worst nightmares. The room was massive, extending far underground. The doctor had clearly excavated and built a hidden laboratory beneath the clinic. State-of-the-art medical equipment lined the walls, monitors displayed brain scans and neural patterns, and in specially constructed chambers he saw them. Marcus, Rosemary, and Daniel, all alive but connected to machines, unconscious and being used as test subjects. James's camera worked overtime, documenting everything. He found Ashford's research notes and began photographing them, his horror growing with each page. The doctor wasn't just experimenting, he was conducting highly illegal neurological research, attempting to develop a form of mind control technology. The notes referenced previous subjects from other communities, detailing how he'd perfected his method of gaining trust, isolating vulnerable individuals, and conducting his experiments. The most chilling discovery was a manifesto outlining his ultimate plan, to develop a technology that could influence human behavior on a mass scale, which he intended to sell to the highest bidder, whether that was governments, corporations, or criminal organizations. The isolated village had been perfect for his work, close-knit enough that disappearances would be noticed but attributed to local causes, remote enough that outside authorities rarely interfered, and trusting enough that they'd welcomed him with open arms. James was so absorbed in photographing the evidence that he almost didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs behind him. Well, came Dr. Ashford's cold voice. I knew someone was getting curious. You were very good, James. I almost didn't notice you watching. Almost. James spun around to see the doctor standing at the entrance, no longer wearing the kind mask he showed the village. His face was twisted with annoyance and something worse, the absolute confidence of someone who believed he held all the power. You've seen too much, Ashford continued, reaching into his jacket. I'm afraid you'll have to join my other subjects. Don't worry, you won't feel much after the initial injection. And you'll be contributing to something far greater than this little village could ever. But James had planned for this possibility. His camera had been broadcasting via cellular connection to a laptop hidden in his home, with instructions for his roommate to check it if he didn't return by midnight. More importantly, as Ashford pulled out a syringe, James pulled out his phone and hit the button on his emergency app, the one connected directly to the county sheriff's office. I've already sent everything to the authorities, James bluffed, his voice steadier than he felt. Even if you stop me, they're already on their way. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Ashford's face. He grabbed for James, but years of hiking Willowbrook's terrain had made the young man quick and agile. James dodged, kicking over a cart of equipment to block Ashford's path, and ran for the stairs. Behind him, he could hear the doctor's furious shouts and the sound of equipment crashing. James burst out of the clinic into the night air, running not toward his home but toward the festival, toward the lights and safety of the gathered community. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he didn't stop until he reached the town square, where he collapsed in front of the stunned crowd, gasping out his terrible news. The aftermath happened quickly and yet seemed to unfold in slow motion for the traumatized community. James's emergency alert had indeed summoned help, and within 30 minutes, sheriff's deputies arrived in force. Dr. Ashford, realizing his operation was exposed, had attempted to destroy evidence and flee, but the villagers, led by Marcus Webb's brother and Daniel Torres's mother, had surrounded the clinic, blocking every exit. Their fear had transformed into righteous fury, but Margaret Chen's voice of reason had prevailed, urging them to let the law handle justice. When authorities entered the underground laboratory, they found Marcus, Rosemary, and Daniel alive but heavily sedated. Paramedics rushed them to the city hospital, where doctors worked to reverse the effects of Ashford's experimental drugs. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of his crimes. He'd targeted at least 7 other rural communities over the past decade, leaving a trail of missing persons and unexplained deaths across 3 states. Dr. Victor Ashford, which wasn't even his real name, was apprehended trying to destroy hard drives containing years of research. The evidence James had gathered, combined with what authorities found in the laboratory, ensured that the man would spend the rest of his life in prison. His credentials had been partially falsified, his humanitarian work a cover for finding isolated, trusting communities where he could continue his horrific experiments. The 3 victims recovered slowly, both physically and mentally. Marcus struggled with gaps in his memory and nightmares. Rosemary, the eldest, showed remarkable resilience, telling everyone that she'd survived worse in her 83 years, though her family could see the trauma in her eyes. Daniel, the youngest, required extensive therapy, but the community's support helped him heal in ways that surprised the counselors brought in to help. The media descended on Wilbrook, turning their quiet tragedy into headlines: Village of Trust Betrayed, Doctor's Dark Experiments in Rural America, Community Uncovers Serial Predator. For weeks, the village was no longer a peaceful haven but a crime scene, a spectacle, a cautionary tale. Reporters interviewed anyone who would talk, and tourists came not to experience their harmonious way of life but to gawk at the infamous clinic. Through it all, the community struggled with complex emotions. There was guilt: how had they been so blind? There was anger, at Ashford, at themselves, at a world where such evil could masquerade as help. There was grief for the innocence lost, for the trust that had been shattered. But there was also gratitude for James's courage and detective work, and a fierce determination to not let this destroy what they'd built. Margaret Chin called a town meeting 3 months after Ashford's arrest, once the media attention had finally died down and life was attempting to return to normal. The town hall was packed, every seat taken, people standing along the walls. "We have been hurt," she said, her voice strong despite her years. "We have been violated in the worst way possible. Our trust, our greatest strength, was turned into a weapon against us. Some of you have said we should close our doors completely, never let another stranger into Wilbrook. I understand that impulse. I feel it too." She paused, looking around at faces she'd known for decades. "But if we do that, if we let fear rule us, then he wins. Not just the man who hurt us, but every person who believes that kindness is weakness, that community is naive, that trust is foolish." "So what do we do?" called out Daniel's mother, her voice breaking. "How do we stay open and stay safe?" "We learn," Margaret answered. "We implement better screening processes. We check references more thoroughly. We limit access to sensitive areas. We trust our instincts when something feels wrong, even if we can't explain why. We train more of our own people in medical care so we're never this vulnerable again. But most importantly, we support each other and we don't let fear poison the beautiful thing we've created here." The village took her words to heart. They established new safety protocols while maintaining their essential character. Sarah Mitchell enrolled in nursing school, with the community crowdfunding her education. They created a proper medical committee to oversee any future healthcare providers. They installed security measures that had once seemed unnecessary but now felt prudent. James Nakamura was hailed as a hero, though he struggled with that designation. "I was just paying attention," he'd say, uncomfortable with the praise. But the village knew better. His observant nature, his willingness to investigate despite the danger, and his courage in that underground laboratory had saved 3 lives and potentially prevented future tragedies. A year later, on the anniversary of Ashford's arrest, the community gathered beneath the great willow tree for a special ceremony. They planted 3 new saplings, one for Marcus, one for Rosemary, and one for Daniel, to represent resilience and new growth from deep roots. They also dedicated a small memorial stone that read, "In memory of innocence lost, in celebration of courage found, and in hope for wisdom gained. May we always remain both kind and careful, trusting and vigilant, open and protected." Marcus gave a speech that day, his voice still sometimes uncertain but growing stronger. "What happened to us was evil. But you know what I realized during my recovery? Evil only wins when it destroys more than it touches. This village rallied around us, supported us, and refused to let fear win. We're still here, still together, still believing in the power of community. That's not naivety, that's strength." The village of Wilbrook never fully returned to its pre-Ashford innocence. How could it? They had learned that danger could wear a kind face, that evil could speak with a gentle voice, that not everyone who offers help comes with pure intentions. But they also learned that vigilance doesn't require cynicism, that safety measures can coexist with openness, and that their greatest strength, their bond with each other, could weather even the darkest storms. Years later, when James Nakamura's daughter asked him about the story that had become local legend, he told her, "Evil found us because we were trusting. But good saved us because we were connected." The lesson isn't to stop trusting, it's to trust wisely, and to never underestimate the power of people who genuinely care for one another. And in that balance, between openness and caution, between trust and verification, between hope and wisdom, Willowbrook found a way forward, scarred but not broken, changed but not destroyed, forever vigilant but still, in their hearts, a village of harmony.